So now we get to the tiling portion, and before I do that, I always like to use this golf ball demonstration to show that we have good pitch for the tile and the water going into the drain. I like doing that. I've already grouted the shower floor, and I usually let it dry, I don't know, a couple hours at least beforehand, before I start tiling the walls. Here I'm just kind of sorting out where the tile is going to land. So as you saw earlier, I made markings on where my tile is going to land going up to the ceiling, because I don't want a sliver cut at the ceiling. And now I'm just marking the middle portion and figuring out what my cuts are going to be on the left and right. I was a little fortunate with this job that my customer did not want this tile staggered, which is almost always the case. But regardless, the measurements are still done ahead of time so that you know where things are going to land properly. And then I use what I call a ledger board, and this is usually a straight 1x. There are different types of 1x at Home Depot. I get the most expensive one because they tend to be straighter. So it's a finished piece rather than kind of a rough piece. Anything could be a ledger board. I carry quite a few of these 1x's in my arsenal of weapons, because all showers are kind of created differently with size and all that stuff. And so once I've leveled out, I go up. If this tile is 11 3/4, for example, I go to about 11 and a half, maybe a little better than a half, and I go to my highest point of my shower, which none really should be the highest, but I always double check and measure that, and that's where my ledger board goes. Sometimes just shy of what the tile size is, because I know that eventually that first row will go last and it's going to have to be shaved down. With any luck, a lot of times I don't have to shave that first piece that I set in last. I don't have to shave it at all. That it fits perfectly, and that's what my goal is. But I do my ledgers all the way around. I use a laser level as well as a level to make sure that I'm right on point. That makes it possible for me to run my tile from day one of doing the field tile. I can run my tile all the way up to the ceiling if I want to, and then the next day I can pull those boards off and then put in my first tile last. And you'll see that a little bit later on. I flip that bottom tile upside down and make the mark of any cuts that I have to do. Yes, cross white every which way I can, get it level. So you saw where I was setting that level on two different boards to make sure that that's good to go. And then of course a piece of sheetrock, a piece of cardboard, something to protect the floor as I'm stacking my tile. I don't want the thin set to glob all over it. And by the way, with those ledger boards being screwed in the wall that's already waterproofed, what I do is when I pull those boards off, I don't know if I show it in here, but where those screw holes are at, I fill that in with some silicone. This is where the tiling process begins in earnest. I always start with my largest back wall first, and I'll run that all the way up to the ceiling if I want to, but usually at least 3 or 4 rows of tile get on that back wall first before I ever address the left and the right. I use a 6-inch taping knife to throw my mortar up on there, and as you saw earlier, kind of key it into the backer. You could use the opposite end of your trowel, but this 6-inch taping knife I use a lot, and it depends on the habit that you get into. I suppose at first, if I had gotten into the habit of using the flat side of my trowel to do all of that, then I would have started that process, and that's how I would have worked it. And a lot of guys do, but I don't. So a 6-inch taping knife is by default what I use, but it doesn't really matter as long as you get the job done. My troweling is with a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch notch trowel. On large format tile, that's what you want. And you see there I'm putting my laser on it, making sure that even though my ledger board is level as possible, I still want to throw my laser up there to ensure that as I'm stacking, not necessarily every single row, although you could do that, but at least every couple of rows I throw my laser up there, make sure I'm on point. And then of course every row I'm putting a level on regardless. The troweling of the thin set directionally, these are 12 by 24 tile, and you have an elongated left to right on a larger tile. So when I do my troweling, I don't do it left to right, same as the tile runs, because with those ridges, you're ultimately trying to collapse them. As you saw, I butter my tile always, doesn't matter what size. And so my trowel marks want to be in opposition of the long part, which is why I'm now troweling it out in opposition, because it's a lot easier for air to get compressed out of there as you push the tile into the thin set and collapse those ridges in a shorter distance, which would be the way I'm doing it now, as opposed to, you know, the long way left to right. Leveling clips became a solution to a problem. When we started getting into large format tile, probably about a good 7 or 8 years ago, the large format tile are burned in such a way that they're heated and yada yada yada. There's a lot of explanation I can go into as to why a lot of this tile is bowed, and because it's bowed, you have to use leveling clips. They, as I said, became a solution to a problem that began with large format tile. And as I said before, I got really fortunate with this job where he did not want it staggered. So the leveling clips are a little less needed. I still use them regardless. But when you're stacking tile rather than offsetting it, the bow effect doesn't happen quite as much. This is a relatively good tile. It is what we call rectified, meaning that every single tile. Oh, I want to talk about this. I don't use a manual cutter very often. I should, but I don't, because I have to have relative consistent lines, which I have. I know going up this left and right side that I'm going to have basically the same cuts all the time. And it makes it easier using a manual cutter than it does, you know, running that through my wet saw over and over and over. So yes, I use my manual cutter, especially in this bathroom. It's a very, very small work area, and the manual cutter just, for me, worked better on this particular job. Getting back to the difference between rectified and non-rectified, every tile in every box, if you take one out arbitrarily from one box to another one, all those tiles should match up side by side, end to end, perfectly, with maybe, you know, a 32nd inch difference at best, right? You don't want to see, you know, like a 16th inch discrepancy of two tile against each other. Also, the edge are cornered edges, meaning they're straight, as opposed to some tile which has a slight curvature on the edges, which you know at that point is not rectified. And the reason that matters to us, if you have, say, a 16th inch discrepancy between two tile, and that becomes consistent, then by the second row that 16th becomes an 8th, and then the 8th becomes, you know, it just exponentially becomes a larger line, which is why all tilers would rather work with a rectified than non-rectified tile. And you will pay a little bit more. And some tile out there that comes from China and other places say on the box that it's rectified, and when it's truly not. And the only way to kind of decipher that, oh yeah. So what I do is I'm running my tape all the way up to the ceiling. The ceiling is, although ceilings are off also, but the ceiling is a pretty good indicator of, as I measure down from the ceiling to that second row of tile, I want to see the same measurement on both the left and right. So if I'm measuring 67.5 on the left, I want to be 67.5 on the right. And that matters because even if I end up with a sliver cut at the top, which we try and avoid, then at least I want that sliver cut to be consistent. So I can manipulate my tile somewhat as the rows start stacking up to take up for that difference if I have to. And it's pure manipulation. All that, that's all the tile part is. All the prep that you saw earlier, all that prep takes the longest. It'll take me, out of a 10-day job, usually 7, sometimes 8 days as prep before I ever start setting tile. So during that process, everything matters because I know I'm going to be tiling over my prep, so I'm trying to get it right. But yeah, the rectified is 1,000% better, if it's a true rectified, than any other tile. What you saw earlier, as you're looking at the video on the left side, I had put in a little piece, I don't know if you saw it or not, I had put in a little piece of scrap Schluter. I have an edging with the Schluter, the aluminum trim. See it there? So I'm sizing that up as I'm setting my tile because I know that my trim is going to go last, and I want it to be consistent going up the wall. There are a lot of guys that will set their edging in there first and somehow, glue it in there with some thin set and then run their tile up to it. And I don't know. For me, everybody has their own method. It's always been easier for me to set my Schluter last. That way, even if the wall is off, and this one definitely was, that my Schluter, that my tile and my Schluter will run consistent with the off wall, right? That's kind of the way I look at it anyway. And I'm going to get to that process when we get toward the end of the tiling. What I'm doing is I'm leaving a gap. It's hard to see on this video because it's fast speed, but there's a small gap, probably 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch on the edge of that wall that I'm not putting thin set on. And I think you're going to see it here. I think on this tile I actually put thin set on the edge, and then I scrape it up. There I go. I'm scraping it off because I know full well that's the gap that I want to leave for my Schluter later on. And when I say 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch, it really doesn't matter, because 98% of my tile is affixed to the wall, and that little 1 or 2% at the edge will get filled in. I'll push some thin set into that gap and then slide my Schluter strip in there retroactively, meaning after all the tile is done. But I'm still checking it with that little scrap piece of Schluter that I have, and I'm making sure, you saw my rubber mallet, I'm making sure that my tile are up to the edge as possible, which on this particular job was really, really hard. This condo was built, I believe, in the 80s, and it was, I think, an apartment complex at one time, and it was just a shoddy workmanship with the whole building and every unit, and nothing was square and plumb and flat and level here at all. And then of course, you saw earlier, if you watched the prep part, that I had to screed out some extra mud on that wall to get it, to the point where I was happy with a straight edge going on. So the battle that we run into prior to the tile, trust me on that, is real. We're always, there's not a lot of playroom with tile. It's kind of finite to some extent. I mean, you can shave and manipulate and cut, and do what you can, but at the end of the day, you want the tile to be as nice and level and flat and all that stuff as possible. And when you're not dealing in a perfect world, it's hard to get your perfect thing going on. This is a rubbing stone. So after I cut the tile on the edge of there, it's literally a stone that is, best way I could put it is like sandpaper, a sandpaper-ish type of stone. The rubbing stone knocks off that rough edge of the cut, if you have a rough edge, so that when I set that cut edge on that left corner there, that you're not seeing, you know, like you're not seeing a bad cut. You're seeing more or less a factory edge on that left side. And by the way, my factory edges are always factory to factory. All my cut edges are always in the corner. Always, always. Here we get to, yeah, the grinder. So you can run this through a tile saw and make those cuts, and it'll take a while, and you'll see that I go through my wet saw and kind of knock off, you know, the other part. But this grinding wheel, which is basically, you know, a diamond type blade, same as your wet saw, this is how I'm making my cut around the valve. And of course I'm doing outside because it does kick up a lot of dust. So you're kind of doing that at an angle, and then you can just knock off the larger pieces with something, and to kind of, yeah. So I don't use a grinder a whole lot. I thought I'd show it in this video to make life easier for some of you guys, but I can run that through the wet saw and do little straight cuts and knock those straight cuts off, and then kind of follow up with it like I'm doing here. Almost as easy and as fast as I could a grinder. But the grinder is a very, very helpful tool when doing circular cuts. I don't know why we are so perfectionist. Look at that little 1/8 of an inch that I'm knocking off of there to fit around that mud cap. Even though I know full well that my escutcheon plate that goes on there will definitely cover that edge. We're just so focused on getting nice, clean, tight cuts all the time. And it's annoying. It's annoying for us that we have to do things, that we feel compelled to make things as perfect as possible. You know, because it does speak, I mean, all the prep you don't see, but the tiling part you do see, and well, arguably you're not going to see that cut. Again, it's going to be covered, but yeah, that's what we're focused on. Yeah, so you move that tile around, collapse those ridges the best you can. I'm still leaving a gap on that left side because the Schluter will go inside of there as well. And then you can knock down the edges as you're putting the clips inside of there. And that's what I'm doing there. And anything will work. You know, the tool that I'm using there, it doesn't have to be that. It can be, you know, your 6-inch knife. It could be, you know, a smaller knife. It doesn't really matter. But people are fixated on certain tools for certain things, and that's not necessary. Yeah, that's where I'm cutting for the shower valve. And that diamond tip hole cutter with that guide, put a little water in there, you know, do a little, you see how I'm kind of turning it around a little bit. I'm not going straight into it so it doesn't get caught up. And that's how I do my holes if I have holes to cut, which on this case is going to be the neck of that shower head. There are different ways to cut holes. It doesn't even have to be circular. It could be a square. But again, you know, we're fixated on details that will never be seen because I know the plate is going to cover that. Where am I going here? I don't know why I went outside. Yeah, here's where I'm actually doing the bottom row. I've pulled off the boards and now I'm making my mark. You saw my tile was backwards at first. You know, I kind of flipped the tile upside down and then made my mark at the top, which now becomes the bottom. And then I'm shaving off, it looks like about 1/2 inch. And then that cut side will go squarely at the bottom. Even though I marked it at the top, I know it's kind of back-assward. But I marked it at the top and then flipped it back over and marked the lines on the surface. And then when I cut it, it fits in there like a glove. Of course, I have about 1/8 of an inch gap that I leave for the spacing between the tile, and about another 1/8 inch gap before the floor, which is why eventually I'm going to put in some shims in there to kind of bump it up. And I will cut all of those as I'm doing, dry fit them first, so I have enough time for them to dry before I put mud on there and set them on the wall. And before I do that, I get over to the curb area. I think I've already set the outside and the inside of the tile of the curb. Yeah, I think I have already. But I'm doing that before I do my wall tile, because I want the overlap of my wall tile definitely on the top of that curb. That's one contiguous piece of quartz. And I could have just as easily used one of these 6-foot long marble. My customer had chosen quartz, and it was cut down the size perfectly, wall to wall, left to right. And then I'm just trying to get my slope right. So I just throw a bunch of mud on top of that. I think I'm going to show that. Throw a bunch of mud on there. And the outside of my tile is slightly raised so that I can get my slope properly. The inside is flush with the top of the curb. And I think the outside is sloped. I think those shims on the outside of that tile are pushing up that outside tile probably about a quarter of an inch. About a quarter of an inch. And then the discrepancy between that quarter of an inch and my flush part of my inside now gets filled in with mud that I screed off evenly going across. And back butter my piece of quartz. And the back buttering on here is so that, you know, the top of my curb and the quartz have a good adhesion to each other. So the back buttering here is not as, it doesn't have to be thick. You know, like I put it on thick to begin with because it's a long, you know, 5-foot run. But then I screed off all the excess. Again, you're just trying to get good adhesion between the two material. And that's what the mud does for you. And there it goes. Set it right on top. Wiggle it around a little bit so that the two blend together. And yeah, now my wall tile can overlap that. You see, water will shed off my wall tile onto the curb that's, you know, like literally fashioned into the wall already. Also, these curb tops are usually 6 inches wide, and by the time you're done with your prep, you have 5.5. So in the past, my customers are okay with that little 1/2 inch overhang between the 6 inches of the curb and the 5.5 of, you know, a finished. When I say finished, the inside and outside tile is done on the curb, and they're okay with that 1/2 inch overhang. But lately, people are not wanting that. They're wanting that curb top flush. So for that reason, you have to put two pieces of backer board either on the inside or the outside of the curb in order to bump that out to where your final is 6 inches, so your curb top will work right. This is where I said earlier how I'm pushing in thin set into that gap that I intentionally put on the edge of the tile. And so I think I have a little 3-inch taping knife that I'm doing that with. Because I'm getting ready to slide my Schluter strip into that gap. And you see that gap at the top of the ceiling. As I said, you know, some of that tile at the very top is pretty flush, and then some of it toward the end on that wall I'm working on isn't. There's probably about a 3/4 inch gap, which I wasn't happy about on this job, but you know, it is what it is. So I asked my customer what he wanted to do about it, and he said, "Oh, I can just leave it like that. I'm not picky." And I'm like, "Well, I am. You know, I don't want, you know, like a 1/4 inch gap at the front of the shower, and then you get to the back of the shower and there's a 3/4 gap." So I would not put a sliver cut in there, but I did offer up putting crown molding. They have plastic crown molding, so the wood would not. If you put wood, it could possibly rot out with steam and moisture and all that stuff. And so yeah, the crown molding could take up that discrepancy at the ceiling. But he declined that. He said, I'm perfectly okay with just having that grout line up there. It bothers us, I think, more than some people. You know, we are by nature, I think, perfectionists, tilers and woodworkers, people on the creative end of it. You know, like, you want somebody to come in and not notice the mistakes that you have made. That, you know, because every tiler makes a mistake on a shower, at least one or two or three that they wish they hadn't done, or they wish they had done differently, you know. And 9 times out of 10, customer doesn't even notice it. We notice it more than anybody. Same process here. I'm pushing in thin set into that gap that I caused. And then I clean off the excess thin set with a sponge and then slide my Schluter strip, and it works like a charm every time. It's so easy. That way, if there's any, and if you put a level up against all of those tiles, say, you know, a 6-foot level, more than likely it won't be level. More than likely it won't be. It'll be off just a bit. Because it's not a perfect world and you're trying to deal with an imperfect build. But it looks level because I'm not putting. If I had put my strip up there first and leveled it off, and then the tile wasn't level, yeah, then every tile would have to be cut to conform. Where with this way, it doesn't have to be, and then I'm just pushing it out with little wedges there where I need to overnight until it dries. And the part that every tiler looks forward to, the most fun part, the most exciting part of every tile job, is the grouting, he said sarcastically. This is probably the most boring, most monotonous, most time-consuming part of every tile job that we do is grouting. It's just, yeah, it's like nails on a chalkboard. It's like, yeah. We don't look forward to it, except that we know that it is the end of the job, and that's a good thing, even though we're moving on to another one. There's not much more I can say about the grouting process. There's a lot of videos on YouTube on how to grout, on how to sponge things off. You know, every tiler thinks that they have the key to make it happen, and every tiler does it a different way. You know, a lot of guys will mix up their grout in a bucket. I don't. I use that little sheetrock mud trough for my grout, so I'm mixing up the amount that I think I'll need rather than mixing a wasted amount up in a bucket. But that's just me. Do I start at the bottom or the top? Generally speaking, I start at the top and work my way down to the bottom. I don't know why I'm starting at the bottom here. Maybe this is the finishing phase. Maybe my editing of this video is horrible and you're going to see me grouting again from the top going down. I don't know. I have no explanation for it. Clean water is the key. If your water gets mucked up, you know, if it was a larger shower or a smaller tile with more grout lines, make sure you swap out that water constantly. I don't mean constantly, I mean like, don't use that same water longer than, you know, say about an hour, hour and a half. It'll get mucked up too bad. So put some fresh water in there, it'll help you out. I think that's why I have 2 buckets showing there. But yeah, I'm using all 4 sides of the sponge. You don't want to over sponge grout for a lot of different reasons, the least of which is adding more moisture to the mix. That would be the least of the problem, but also because you're trying not to dig into the grout line, and the more you sponge, the more tendency you have of digging into the grout line. I think I actually did start my grouting process going from the top down, and this is the final phase of it. And this is where I'm grouting the inside part of that bottom tile where it meets the floor. I do that last, along with the curb and everything, make it look pretty. Wow, guys, I thought I showed on this video more of the tiling process, but I guess I didn't. You know, it's a redundancy, though. So even the tiling part that you did see will give you an idea of how the rest of it's going to go anyway. but I could have sworn I showed like all 3 walls going up and all the cuts and all that stuff. This is where, yeah, last day I'm cleaning off the drain cap. I don't necessarily tape it. I know a lot of guys will do that, but you know, there are some not thin set, grout and stuff like that. You see it all kind of mucked up on the inside. So this is where I do the cleaning phase, you know, anything that's dried up on it. Get rid of that and be careful not to scratch that drain. Yeah, that's about it. That's how to build a shower from scratch. From, you know, like, I don't know what part you're watching. There are 5 parts of this build process. I think one of these videos, I think the first one or perhaps the last one, I forget how I'm going to do it, but that will be a couple of hours of the full shower build, and this will be toward the end of that video. But there are also 5 separate parts of this video. I think they run about 30-35 minutes each, and this is the last one in that series. See how pretty that is? I love those. And if you have a choice, get the better drain cap. That is a stainless steel drain cap that I use that has that nice chrome finish, and they have the cheaper ones that I don't like. Cheaper ones are little flimsy aluminum caps. I can't stand those. I think that one costs about $20, $28, $30, whereas the other one, and when I say the cap, it's not just the cap, it's the whole drain inclusive. This is where I'm pulling out the valve stem. Because I want to flush the line. I've been on this job now for about, I think, 8 or 9 days. And when you turn the water first back on, you don't want all that nasty garbage that's inside of your water lines to get into your shower valve and all that stuff. So this is where I flush the line out. Just turn on the water, the main water a little bit, and then put the valve stem back in, put the locking pin back on that, and then all the pretty stuff follows. I don't think I flushed the line on here because it was a condo, and I think I would have had to shut down the whole building, but I did show that process of pulling out the stem for the purposes of me telling you right now on, you know, what the best practice should be. You know, flush out your lines first before you put the valve stem in, and the shower head and all that stuff. The shower head has a screen in it, and you can cut down on your water pressure by having all that mucked up stuff clog up your screen of your shower head. Every shower valve that I deal with, whether Price Fixture, Moen, Delta, they're all basically the same for me by now. That, you know, you see there's no instruction book because I figured them out already. So there's nothing much I can tell you here because I forget which one this is. I believe it's a Moen. But the process is almost the same on all of them. You know, it's putting in the valve, it's putting on the scutcheon plate, it's putting on the handle, which I'm doing there, and it usually has a little Allen screw that attaches on the inside, and I'm putting the handle on there. And then, of course, I put the shower neck on and the shower head. In this case, there is a wand type feature that has a magnetic backing on it that, you know, fits to where the shower neck comes down, which is a wonderful, wonderful idea. I love it because it has a hose on it, so it's detachable. You can use it as a shower head or just pull off the magnetic part of that shower head and it becomes, you know, a shower spray. And I absolutely love it. I've done about 3 of those so far, and I don't know why I get excited about them. I think they're more practical than just a plain shower head or a shower head with a you know, with an arm on it, not an arm, you know, the elongated pole type thing where your body spray kind of runs off of, or your spray. So multifunctional, this thing. Yes, the end of channel locks. When you have a finish like this, like I have with this nickel finish, you don't want to grab that thing with your channel locks. Use the end of something rubber on the inside of that and turn it in such a way that, you know, you're as tight as you possibly can. I think I may have missed that part. Teflon tape is a very integral part when you put that shower arm on, that you want to wrap the threads with Teflon tape or pipe dope so you don't have any leakage. And here's where that spray attachment goes on with the hose. I just love this. I don't know the make and manufacturer and all that stuff. If somebody wants to know, I can find out from my customer. But yeah, that's the magnetic part at the bottom, and then you'll see how it attaches on there. It's just a wonderful, inventive idea. Inventive. I make up my own words sometimes. Yes, inside gaskets, make sure you have no leak. And that's basically it, guys. If that helped you in any way, shape, or form, then contribute to my PayPal if you can. If you can't afford that, on a one-time donation, hit my Patreon link and become a Patreon member. On a monthly basis, you can support my channel because I don't make anything on YouTube. All right. Enough of the talk already. Now I'm talking on camera. So, it is finished. A job like this, whether I'm just building a shower and doing a tub to shower conversion, typically is depending on a lot of things. Depending on if it's upstairs or down in the basement, how much access I have. You know, like this is a condo, this is very difficult because of access and storage and all that stuff. But average 8 to 10 days, 8 to 10 working days, what it takes to build a shower or a tub to shower conversion. So if all I did is tear out this shower and build another shower, and the tub wasn't an issue, because it's really not, you saw how quickly I was able to take all that stuff out, then yeah, it would be about probably a 10-day job, because all this demo would be a real pain. So this is the final product. You saw me just put the valve on and all that stuff. So what I did off camera, after I started putting everything on and I had the hose out, I realized that I didn't flush the line. Sometimes things goop up inside of the plumbing and all that stuff, so when you turn the water on, it's a good idea to flush the line. That's what I did off camera, and then I just put all this pretty stuff on. This is one of those magnetic heads that I had a customer a couple of years ago that had bought one, and I thought, wow, not only is it sleek and nice looking, but it's very functional. So yeah, it's just an ingenious idea where just a very strong magnet puts it right back up. For those of you that are wondering, this is a Moen. And Moen, Price Fisher, Delta, you know, they're all basically the same. The way I put them in, you know, I've just done so many that it's kind of like second nature. So everything is done to my customer's specs. There are a couple of things you noticed earlier. To my customer's specs, I went ahead and put this what is it, this fake marble, it's not really marble, it's quartz, man-made product anyway. So I put this in, there's a nice pitch in there, and then I just kind of finish it out. I always offer, when people ask me, you know, well, why didn't you do this, or why didn't you do that? Because I always offer my customer different choices, and then they make the ultimate choice. So I offered to do a 45 cut, and he said, no, no big deal. I'm gonna get back to this in just a minute. So, because there is so much plumbing and HVAC and all this stuff in that wall, that's why we couldn't do there, so it ended up being back there. Also, and I may have mentioned it in the other video, this tile overlaps onto the curb top. For the simple fact that every tiler out there that's built in these showers knows that this is Achilles heel. Your corners are the Achilles heel, which is why I had mentioned earlier in the other video about the dam corners, because the dam corners would wrap around, before all this other stuff was put on, would wrap around and make sure that water would never penetrate into this wood and all this other stuff. Having said that, the reason that it penetrated in there is because the whole curb was saturated, not just the corner. The corner looks like it's the problem, but the whole curb was the problem. The operator malfunction caused this to happen. So I mitigate that by having a wall board there, not sitting on the floor, same as on the inside, doesn't sit on the floor. There's no wicking action that could take place. And then my wall board is completely waterproof with RedGuard, as is my curb, as is the curb top going inside of the tile. So now water just wants to shed off. It's never gonna get inside there. Hey, if you enjoyed that video and you learned something, consider being a Patreon member. $5, $10, $15 a month would help me greatly produce more videos. I make nothing from YouTube at all. If you're gonna call me for advice, please donate $50 for 30 minutes. My link to my PayPal and my Patreon account is down below. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so you get immediate notifications as soon as I post videos. And thank you very much for your support.